Dear listeners, podcasting is a community thing. Hardly anything helps a podcast grow like endorsement and cross-promotions from fellow podcasters. So today, please enjoy this message from one of the greatest podcasts out there, the Ancient History Hound Podcast.
Are you interested in ancient history and the occasional pun? If so, Ancient History Hound is for you. Hi, my name's Neil, and I'm the host of Ancient History Hound, a podcast which covers a range of topics across ancient Greece and Rome. Whether you're someone new to it all or a seasoned veteran, I've got you covered. Find Ancient History Hound wherever you get your podcasts from. Alternatively, visit my website, ancientblogger.com, or find me on Twitter, @ancientblogger.
Welcome to The Forgotten, Season 3, Episode 1, Following the Heritage. No ideology has shaped the 20th century like socialism, or rather, the antagonism between socialism and capitalism. In the name of either of those political and economical systems, countless governments have been toppled, wars have been fought, atrocities have been committed. Over the course of this century, in most cases, socialist systems were almost always erected by the power of forceful and, more often than not, violent revolution. Yet among those stories of civil war and murder, there are those of countries that achieved a system change by peaceful means. And among those stories, limited in number already, there are many that end in turmoil and defeat. Today, we will embark on a journey to Chile, from the Atacama Desert in the north to the rich pastures of the south. We'll follow the story of a young man born on 26th of June 1908, in the beautiful and prosperous port city of Valparaiso. His name is Salvador Isabelino del Sagrado Corazón de Jesús Allende Gossens. Chile is a remarkable country in every perspective. This, of course, means it also has a rather remarkable history. Discovered by Ferdinand Magellan in 1520, the country was settled in 1541 by the Spanish. The first settlement was Santiago, which remains the country's capital to this day. Chile provided the Spanish crown with an almost inexhaustible reserve of copper, which would become one of two goods to shape the national history of the country to this very day. The War of Chilean independence is the first time we stumble across the name Allende in this story. José Gregorio Allende, Salvador's great-grandfather, was famed for his valor fighting alongside the great hero of Chilean independence, Bernardo O'Higgins. This war, lasting from 1810 to 1826, saw O'Higgins installed as the Director Supremo of Chile in 1817, a dictator who was to usher the newly independent country into an era of stability and prosperity. Yet history had another fate for the victorious commander. His liberal ideas quickly antagonized both the church and the aristocracy. As he had founded his political position not on a particular prowess in negotiations of superior tactfulness, his career was largely dependent on his military merits of the war. As the fighting came to a standstill and a military expedition into Peru failed, 1823 saw the dictator flee into exile, where he died in 1842. José Allende followed his idol into exile, fighting under Simón Bolívar in the coming wars against the Spanish and fostering a son named Ramón, Salvador's grandfather. Ramón grew up to be a doctor and, as his father had been, a radical liberal supporter of democracy, which led him to actively care for the poor and wretched, as well as being elected into the Chilean Congress in 1876. This Congress, however, was not as powerful as any parliament in a modern democracy. Independent Chile was, all things considered, a mixture of oligarchy and aristocratic republic. The country, the great victor of the War of the Pacific, in which it defeated almost all its neighbors simultaneously in a fight for the rich sources of guano and nitrates, was highly dependent on foreign investment, especially from Britain. In 1875, near the climax of the war, the country had racked up the excessive amount of over £1 million in foreign debt. This would mean around £180 million in today's currency. Yet the victorious war and its prize, the guano sources, could have solved those problems, hadn't they been given into the hands of foreign investors, leaving the country with tariffs as the main source of income and out of control of the resources itself. This, obviously, made some people very rich, especially landowners and families with business heritage. Many more, however, especially peasants, miners, and other menial laborers, were left in incredible poverty. The left wing of the political spectrum around the liberal Partido Radical, the Radicals, was the spearhead in the fight against this social inequality. One of its leaders made his case in 1896. What do the helpless need to survive this ruthless struggle? Only protection. That is, the assurance that the state will equalize the conditions of the combatants, giving arms to the weak to fight with the strong. This is what individualism denies to the helpless. Salvador's grandfather was a big political and social figure. He was both responsible for founding the Chilean army's medical corps, as well as a vicious campaigner for the secularization of the country. This and his Freemason activities were enough for the church to excommunicate him. Nonetheless, his funeral in October 1884 was a big event. 2 future presidents of Chile were among his coffin bearers. One of them, José Balmaceda, will be a major factor in the life of Salvador Allende's father, Salvador Allende Castro the Elder. Salvador Allende the Elder was a man of interesting character. Reputedly a charismatic and charming man, he was also throwing away his money left and right, as well as a terrible Casanova. He fought alongside President Balmaceda's troops in the Chilean Civil War, a conflict between the liberal president and what started as an uprising of naval personnel. Long story short, Balmaceda lost terribly and shot himself in the Argentinian embassy in September 1891. It is debated whether the British nitrate magnates funded and supplied the uprising, as Balmaceda supported both workers' rights and harbored thoughts about nationalizing the vital nitrate industry. After being captured by the revolution's forces, Salvador was quickly set free and rehabilitated by Balmaceda's successor. His mother, Laura Gossens Uribe, was not as lucky. The daughter of a Swiss immigrant had lost a brother in the war, who was captured and executed by loyalist forces. As Victor Figueroa Clark, one of the best English biographers of Allende, puts it, the Allende-Gossens family had experienced the division and the brutality of civil war in his own family, and this was one of the reasons he later opposed a violent road to revolution. Allende's father became a lawyer again, his pre-war occupation, and rose up to be lawyer at an appeals court in Tacna. His wife and him had 2 previous children, both of which did not survive infancy. Salvador Allende the Younger was as such named after his deceased elder brother, and his sister Laura was named after her elder sister. Tacna became home to Salvador Allende for the first 10 years of his life. During the War of the Pacific, the city had been conquered by the Chileans. The population, however, was overwhelmingly Peruvian, which caused the city to be in a difficult political climate. The liberal and conservative governments that succeeded Balmaceda tried hard to Chileanize the city, which led to further tension. As such, young Salvador spent his early life in a city where politics were everywhere, which certainly shaped his character. He gave presidential speeches with 1 foot atop a stool as a little child, and had to confront some of his classmates in debates about a possible independence of the city from Chile. In 1918, however, the family moved. His father was being redeployed, and the political situation became more and more dangerous for Chilean families, especially those in service of the state. The next stop in his life became the city of Iquique, center of Chile's nitrate industry, and stage of bloody conflicts between protesters and police, as well as socialist agitations for the last 10 years. Although the Allende-Gossens family only stayed in Iquique for a year, I do believe that their 10-year-old son certainly caught some of the socialist workers' catchphrase and had their chance, which must have greatly impressed the young boy. After spending 2 more years in Valdivia, right at the border to the indigenous Mapuche Indians, the family returned to Valparaiso in 1921. The teenager of 13 years lived an interesting life there. After the city had been devastated by an earthquake in 1906, it had developed 2 subcultures, While the middle and lower classes had stayed in the rubble, the elite and government officials, like Salvador's father, had moved to the countryside at Viña del Mar. He went to school in a city which consisted mainly of workers and traders, and lived in a city where the social elite resided. Interestingly, in his teenage years, he met both future President Alessandri, which would be the president for the beginning of his political life, as well as the Grove family, an influential upper-class family which would also foster President Marmaduke Grove, the first socialist president of Chile. He managed to finish school a year early at age 16, a brilliant student with a brilliant memory and a gift for rhetoric, and decided to study medicine like his grandfather, to help the poor, as he'd later say. His life as a student would shape him into what he'd become later, as it converted his youthful interest in politics into political activity. The spark for this new political activism was the Federación de Estudiantes de Chile, the Federation of Chilean Students, the FECH. The FECH had been founded in 1906. Many of the young men in Santiago went to the university, and many of them were supporters of democracy or even Marxist ideas. Allende himself had first been confronted with Marxist literature in Valparaiso by Juan de Marchi, an exiled Italian anarchist turned shoemaker, who did not only teach him to play chess, something that he'd enjoy all his life, but also filled the young man's head with the writings of Engels, Marx, and Lenin. As such, Salvador Allende was no different from many of his fellow students who had been introduced to the political left. The FECH, however, united all those people under one banner and became a driving force of everyday politics in the capital and, as such, the whole country. Indeed, many new organizations had popped up over the course of the late 1910s and early 1920s. In 1919, the formerly moderate FOCH, Federación Obrera de Chile, Chilean Workers' Federation, had made a radical turn to the left, and in 1912, the Partido Obrero Socialista, the Chilean Socialist Workers' Party, was founded, and above all, hovered Salvador's acquaintance from childhood days in Viña del Mar, Arturo Alessandri. As you might have figured already by the formation of new leftist formations, Chile was in social and political turmoil. The old problems with the nitrate and copper magnates owning a massive share of the wealth were exacerbated by growing inflation and more social upheaval. The bicameral Chilean system, comparable to the system of the United States, was deeply flawed. The president of Chile could both appoint senators and institute senators for life. The Congress, which was elected directly and without any influence of the president, was usually way more liberal and leftist. However, the ruling elites had their hands in every matter, and politics were mostly decided by underhanded deals in the Senate. Yet this meant that Chileans on the left lost trust in democracy and started to openly harbor thoughts of revolution, and they were getting stronger by the hour. As such, the elites had to react, and in 1920 put forward Alessandri, a liberal, as a candidate, who was still largely dependent on the support of conservatives and nationalists, yet still was the first president to rule with Congress rather than against it. Yet Alessandri, a popular candidate and at first a great appeaser of the left wing, was incapable of solving the problems that flooded Chile. The economy was based on two important trade groups, copper and nitrate, which were largely in the hands of foreign investors. Alessandri's attempts to nationalize the industry, remember that, led him into conflict with both his conservative supporters and the British, the most influential exterior force. While the staunch liberal had great support from the middle class lacked the necessary political organizations, vehicles, according to Clark, to make their voices heard. So Alessandri tried to make the necessary changes to the Chilean system by installing social security and protecting trade unions, basically what he was called in for to do. But the conservative elite basically got cold feet and responded with a terrible obstructionism in the Senate. This, of course, greatly infuriated the common man. Salvador's life would take a sharp turn before he went to university. Before his matriculation, he decided that it would befit him to serve his country in the military for a year. He joined the Coraceros, the elite cavalry of the Chilean army. Why did he do that? After all, he was not too friendly to the current Chilean system, although he did not yet think about abolishing it altogether. Clark lists several possible reasons for this military adventure. Firstly, it might have been a combination of patriotism and the many social benefits a veteran of the Chilean army was bestowed with, as well as following his ancestral tradition. Every one of his male ancestors had fought in a war. Secondly, and that's the version Allende went with for the rest of his life, it was that the service in the ranks would provide him with an insight into different classes of the Chilean society and establish connections to people of different stances. Thirdly, and I think a little humorously, Clark says that it maybe was just to impress women, a trait he had inherited from his father. When he left the army in 1925, he was a changed man. However, this single year had left him stumbling behind the political situation in Chile. Alessandri had fallen without him being able to engage in the process, and the new political system would steamroll all resistance. Chile drifted off into a junta system. On September 11th, 1924, you should save this date, Alessandri's government collapsed. Under pressure from both the military and the Senate as well as the people, he voluntarily stepped down from his position. Voluntarily might be a little exaggeration. Indeed, a group of high-ranking officers simply marched into the Moneda, the Chilean presidential palace, and dictated a bunch of laws and a new cabinet to him. The pay of the officers of the army and many public officials was notoriously late, while Alessandri had instituted a law which raised the senators' and congressmen's diet substantially in order to garner support for his public projects and nationalization efforts. His first exile, however, was only a short one. In January 1925, a few months after taking power forcibly, the junta was stopped dead in its tracks. The reason? Public upheaval and interior squabbles. Colonel Carlos Ibáñez del Campo, one of the leaders of the putsch, however, continued his machinations in the background. We will see him again shortly. Facing the still powerful putschists and the conservatives, the last major project Alessandri put through after being reinstated was the new Constitution of Hela of 1925. It is rather important to give this constitution some attention, as it would be in place until the death of Salvador Allende in 1973, and is the framework of the political system this show tries to depict. A rough draft of this constitution must include 4 major points. First and foremost, Alessandri had carried on the work of Balmaceda and Ramon Allende. It proclaimed the insurmountable division of church and state. After this, the power of the Catholic Church in Chile degraded massively, reducing conservative power and the influence of the Vatican massively. Secondly, it divided the Chilean state into 4 different branches. The president, the legislature, the jurisdiction, as the 3 traditional branches, and the Oficina de la Contraloría General de la República, the Comptroller General, responsible for the control of all new laws passed by the executive and legislature. To give this power out of the hands of the judiciary branch itself was the idea of an American economic advisor, which shows the influence of the United States even in this early chapter of the Chilean democracy. Thirdly, it extended the term of the president from 5 to 6 years, but prevented the direct re-election, as well as staggering congressional and senatorial elections so that the president could not base his entire term on the majority he won during his elections, similarly to the midterm elections in the US system. Finally, it allowed for the organization of workers into unions and the right of the state to take over private property. As such, Alessandri, in the dying days of his second presidency, did manage to implement many points of his program into the legal document which was to be the stage on which the story we follow takes place. Young Salvador Allende, however, did finally take up his medical studies in 1926 and moved in with his aunt in Santiago de Chile. Yet only a few months into his studies, the Chilean democracy was seriously threatened. Colonel Ibáñez, one of the dominating figures of the putsch of 1924, was elected president with methods which would have made the likes of Hitler and Mussolini blush. Be sure to come back next time, when we will explore both the machinations of Ibáñez, Salvador Allende's wild university days, his entry on the public stage, and take a look at a young man driven by both revolutionary spirit and love for democracy. I hope you enjoyed this rather broad episode on the history of Chile. Sources on Allende's early life in English and German are few and far between, and I'm currently working on a way to use more Spanish sources. In the next episode, we will focus on Salvador Allende's personal life to a big extent. Please remember, if you're interested into obtaining the script of the coming season with all quotations and some commentary, be sure to either donate on my website or consider supporting me on Patreon. All information on that will be provided in the show notes. I will hand out this first script for free, so you don't have to buy something you did not have a chance to see beforehand. Furthermore, the great indie game studio Serious Sim has provided me with a key to their upcoming game Radio Commander, which I will stream rather soon. Be sure to tune in. I wish you a good day or a good night. See you next time.